I would like to introduce, Rob Watson, who is the founding father of the LEED standard and now the SWEEP standard, who will be speaking at the end after Stan's presentation today and talk about how this new technology really will enable the goals of SWEEP moving forward. And we have Stan Chen. Stan is a leader in the recycling industry. He serves both as the CEO of RecycleGlow, Inc., a recycling technology and service provider, and president of United Metal Recycling, a full-service Class A permitted recycling facility that handles all grades of ferrous and non-ferrous material, source-separated plastics, and fibers using state-of-the-art processing equipment. As an eco-entrepreneur, Stan's passion for sustainability, along with 20-plus years of experience in the recycling industry, has provided the knowledge needed to design and develop ever innovative solutions for the recycling industry, the economy, and the environment. We're really thrilled to have you with us here today, Stan. I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Jill. I'm very thankful to be here. Thank you, Rob. Welcome, everyone, to the Earth Day special focused around climate change, the plastics industry, and how we can use blockchain to try to fix the problem with by tracking recycled plastic. So some of you might know, I was actually trained by what's called the Climate Reality Leadership Project, which was a project by Al Gore that essentially trains people to just talk about climate change and what's going on in our world. So this is actually part of the slide deck is called the Truth in 10, and we're going to start with it right now. This picture is called the Blue Marble. It's probably the most published photograph in all of history and shows our beautiful home planet. It was actually taken, it's a photo of Earth taken by Apollo 17, which is basically the last time the crew traveled towards the moon in December 7th of 1972. So in terms of climate change, there are three questions we really have to ask. Must we change, can we change, and will we change? The first question, must we change, is one that requires a little explanation about what the climate crisis is all about. This is a picture of the horizon of the Earth, and it illustrates how thin the sky is. It's really, really thin, and it's a picture of the troposphere and the stratosphere, and we're treating it as an open sewer. It's a problem because when sunlight comes in through that layer and warms up the Earth, some of the heat that's absorbed is radiated back out to space in the form of infrared radiation. And some of it is trapped by the natural greenhouse layer, which is a good thing. It keeps temperatures within a healthy boundary here on Earth. But the problem is we're thickening that greenhouse gas layer by spewing 152 million tons of man-made heat-trapping gas into it every single day. And when the greenhouse gas layer thickens, that traps more of the outgoing infrared. And where does the greenhouse gas pollution come from? Well, it comes from a lot of sources. I'll talk about the main one in a moment. Transportation is a big problem. The thawing of the permafrost is now a source. The burning of forests, mining, methane from landfills and other sources. And obviously today we're going to be talking about plastics as well. But speaking of plastics, the biggest source by far is our dependence on fossil fuels, which results in all the CO2 being spewed into the sky. You can see that after World War II, it started really shooting up, and it's still going up. And as a result, the extra heat that's trapped by the global warming pollution drives temperatures up. By the way, last year was, they calculated 70% likely to be the hottest year ever measured with instruments. I'm not sure if the final numbers came in yet. 19 of the 20 hottest have been since 2001, and the 5 hottest of all have been in the last 5 years. Last July, Phoenix and Miami had their hottest months ever. In fact, temperature records have been broken all over the world, including in Australia. Look at the capital of Australia, Canberra, set its all-time high temperature record last January. Last April in Africa, Ghana set its all-time high temperature record. In 2019, Europe had the hottest year on record, and all of these countries set their individual hottest year records. Towards the end of June of last year, north of the Arctic Circle in Siberia, it went over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, probably the hottest temperature north of the Arctic Circle. But if we step back and look at the Earth as a whole and see that 71% of the planet is covered by the ocean, 93% of all that extra heat is being trapped, goes into the ocean. And the ocean temperatures are setting a new high temperature record almost every year. And this year, very likely to set a new all-time record as well. So when the oceans heat up so much, that means the storms that come over the oceans are getting much stronger because the warm water feeds that convection energy and feeds moisture into them as well. So getting two storms hitting the US within days of each other, doing a lot of damage. We saw Tropical Storm Laura doing much more damage in the Northern Caribbean. The other thing that happens when oceans heat up so much is it disrupts the water supply, water cycle by vastly increasing the amount of water vapor coming off of the oceans. That's the first stage of the water cycle. Then it's carried by atmospheric rivers as water vapor over the land, and it's released as a downpour and then works its way back into the sea. This is called the hydrological cycle. What we're seeing is that much more water is in these storms. In the Philippines last spring, more than 500,000 people were displaced by the storm. Then towards the end of May, super cyclone Amphan hit Bangladesh and India in the region of the Delta called Sundarbans, which was really devastating. More than 1 million people were driven out of this region north towards Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, and then farther north across the border into India. And when people have to be evacuated during the pandemic, of course, that complicates it a great deal, as we're seeing nowadays. Another really important point made by the Pope and others is that these events have the biggest impact on poor people and also communities of color. That's why in the United States, as we have the New Poor People's Campaign and the Climate Reality Project has partnered with the New Poor People's Project. As you know, you look at these big downpours on a global basis, they've been really increasing. They are 4 times more likely now than they were just a few decades ago. We get what the scientists are calling rain bombs now, just enormous downpours. We had one here. This is a picture of Al Gore's home state of Tennessee not long ago. They're very common around the country, actually. And by the way, obviously, communities of color, minority communities, and poor people are hit the hardest here in the United States as well. If you look at the 10 counties most vulnerable to flooding and other disasters, they are 81% minority in population. Now, farmers are getting hit as well. In 2019, we saw 20 million acres that could not be planted in the Midwest because of the downpours and the flooding. And last summer, there were Hurricane 4 straight line winds that destroyed 30% of the corn crop in Iowa. And these farmers have been going through quite a few numbers of years like this. It's starting to really have it's already having a big impact. It's happening to farmers in other regions and people all over the world. In India, as you know, they get a monsoon every year. But the monsoons are much stronger now. Last year was 50% stronger than normal, and a lot of the people were being impacted. In China, 700,000 people had to be evacuated because of this climate-related flood. 100,000 people in Kenya at the end of last April. And the same extra heat that's disrupting the water cycle by putting moisture in the air and causing the downpours is also pulling the moisture out of the soil and making the droughts deeper and longer. Last summer, we saw groundwater levels fall very, very low in Europe. And the droughts in parts of the Czech Republic, worst drought in 500 years. In Chennai, they almost ran out of water completely in 2019. We've seen that in some other cities as well. So the higher temperatures are obviously associated with more fires. Last summer, we saw that in California, which was happening as I was receiving my training actually last August. As you can see, photos of the cars, the highway during the evacuation, it was 360 wildfires were burning in California during when this photo was taken. Hundreds of wildfires are still active in California. I think like, basically Napa was really affected. And who can forget about the horrific fires in Australia? Wildlife was basically hurt quite a bit. I saw these koala bears with the burnt hands. And of course, in the Amazon, man-made fires to clear land for agriculture doesn't last very long because the soils are thin. In Southern Europe, the Prime Minister of Greece said that climate is having a huge impact on Southern Europe. The reinsurance companies are certainly paying heed because they have to pay out when these disasters strike, and you can see the pattern that they have been following. It's also melting ice, all right? Here is the unnamed huge glacier in Greenland 85 years ago. Here's what it looks like now. And I'm going to superimpose NASA's measurement on how much the ice has melted. Whoops. So into the sea in Greenland. It's melting much faster than they thought. 4 times faster than they thought, actually. So it's basically, it's coming from a so-called permanent ice sheet. Same thing's happening in Antarctica. In Antarctica, you can see the melting of the ice in Antarctica has accelerated dramatically. It surprised a lot of the ice experts over there. And of course, when this land-based ice mass melts, you see the sea levels rise. The 10 cities measured by population that are most affected are largely in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and China. But when you look at cities with assets at risk, the #1 hardest hit is Miami, Florida, and then Guangzhou, and then Newark. This is a picture of an octopus in the parking garage in Miami because of the sea level rise and what they call sunny day flooding, which is it's when in a high tide now floods a lot of areas that was once dry. I mentioned New York City and Newark. In New York City, there's almost $130 billion in real estate assets that's at risk. But probably the most vulnerable are the people who live in low-lying islands, like Kiribati here, where they've already purchased land in another country, so their population can be relocated as the sea takes over. It's also a national security issue. The U.S. Defense Department for many years has warned us about food and water shortages, pandemic disease, and refugee flows caused by climate crisis. And as we saw this happen after the historic drought in Syria and other factors led to the out-migration of refugees from Syria to neighboring countries, and then across the Mediterranean to Europe, where it destabilized the political equilibrium there. The climate crisis is also a health emergency, and we're seeing this in extremely harsh impact, not least because of tropical diseases are moving north. Airline travel has a lot to do with this, but the climate conditions are changing where these diseases can take root and become endemic. And some of these diseases come because we're encroaching on previously wild areas where millions of viruses are still located. We haven't encountered them before. 5 new infectious diseases are emerging every single year. And most of them are diseases that are coming from animals to humans, like this COVID-19 pandemic, originated from bats. And then it was mishandled and it spread widely. There's also air pollution that kills 9 million people a year. And when we burn fossil fuels, we create CO2. That is the principal cause of the climate crisis. But at the same time, we see the creation of so-called conventional air pollution that makes people very sick and kills a lot of people. There are multiple studies now that show particulate pollution from the burning of fossil fuels is a precondition that lifts the death rate from the COVID-19 pandemic. This enormous study in China shows that. There have been studies in the US that show the same thing and in other countries. We have to focus on the racial injustice that's also seen in the excess death rate for Black Americans from COVID-19. And that's where the excessive poverty, it's because of lack of access to healthcare, the living conditions, non-zoomable jobs, there are a lot of factors. And we have to obviously factor in these ethical costs as well. It's not only people that are affected by the climate crisis, we're also in danger of losing up to half of the living species with which we share this earth with in this century, unless we get busy and reduce this population that's causing the temperatures to go up so dramatically. And actually, excuse me, I love that sound, by the way. And if you add up all these impacts of the climate crisis, you see it's obviously unaffordable. We can't even talk about ocean acidification. It's like there's infrastructure damage. Like, right now, climate change and the cost of carbon is the largest threat to the global economy. So must we change? The obvious answer is clearly yes. The second question is, can we change? Luckily, the answer to that question is also yes. 20 years ago, the best projections for wind energy were that we might reach 30 gigawatts by 2010. We've already beat that goal by 22 times over. The exponential curve this is the exponential curve of the use of wind energy, very inspiring. And it's even more inspiring when you look at the best projections for solar 18 years ago. By 2010, they estimated that we might be able to add 1 gigawatt a year. Well, 2010 rolled around, we beat that goal by 17 times over. And last year, we beat that mark by 121 times over. So it's been great. The exponential curve is even steeper for solar, and it's going up even faster. It's because the cost of these technologies is coming down so quickly, it's like computer chips as well. Here's an example of the effect that it's having on Chile. There are all these solar panels they have under construction now, and they're approved for construction to begin. So obviously, this is a breakout. As with many regions in the world, we are seeing this pattern, and it's very, very inspiring, and there's cause for hope. We're not going to run out of solar energy, obviously. We get as much in 1 hour as the entire global economy uses in a full year. We're seeing battery storage improve. Future projects, this is the new trillion-dollar industry. We're also seeing electric vehicles begin to displace the internal combustion engine. The exponential curve on that is getting very, very exciting as well. So can we change? Yes, we can. We've got what we need. Question is, the important question is, will we change? And that's the main reason why we're here. We have a lot going for us. We just obviously re-entered the Paris Agreement. We're really excited about that. More needs to happen because the 5th year anniversary of last year, every nation is being called upon to increase their ambition and chart a course towards even steeper emission reductions. So the pandemic last year definitely caused a delay of 1 year, but basically this year, where everybody's meeting in Glasgow, Scotland, this October, and we're going to review and get back to Paris agreements and just renew our efforts. So business and investment communities are really taking a look at the fact that fossil fuels are not a very good investment anymore. Lots of them are divesting in order to stop losing money on fossil fuels. That's a very, very good thing. We're also seeing state governments taking the lead, and many of them are moving faster than required by the Paris Agreement. We're seeing a lot of cities take the lead on this also. From New York, New Jersey, this area, very proud that New Jersey, where I'm working, New York, is really stepping up as well on that. In terms of investors, we're seeing a lot of companies committed to really thinking about climate change and thinking about renewable energy as well. But today we're talking about how climate change affects plastics and the plastics industry. Well, one thing that I want to point out, especially when we talk about plastics and plastics pollution, is how it ties into climate change, right? Just couple of numbers I want to throw out at you. 8% of the annual global oil consumption is associated with plastics, and that's forecasted to increase by 20% of oil consumption by 2050. In fact, in the US alone, actually, 14% of our oil consumption is for plastic, and it's forecasted to increase to 50% by 2050. So the extraction and transportation of these fossil fuels is very, very carbon intensive. It's estimated 12.5 to 13.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents are emitted every year just from extracting and transporting natural gas to feedstock for plastics production. Greenhouse gas emissions associated with extraction can also basically, we can also talk about the land disturbances in terms of clearing land to build a pipeline. an estimated, like, because of 19.2 million acres have been cleared for oil and gas development, it's an estimated we lost like 1.686 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide that are like, extra, like, is being released because of like the deforestation. So these figures really, really add up in terms of like, the gas and oil and plastics industry. Plastics refining is also greenhouse gas intensive. In 2015, emissions from manufacturing ethylene, the building block of polyethylene plastics, was 184 to 213 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is about like 45 million passenger vehicles emitted during 1 year. All right, so obviously, like, this is like the plastics industry, the fossil fuel industry has a very large impact on climate change. But we can also talk about the fact, like, today I also want to touch upon the fact that the plastics industry, especially in the US, is affected by climate change. I mean, 40% of the US's production capacity when it comes to fossil fuels is based in what's called like, the plastics corridor, like, the Gulf of Mexico. This is like, the Louisiana, Houston, like Port of Houston, all that kind of stuff. This is like, a picture of the sea surge, hurricane risks from like, basically potentially stranded fossil fuel / plastics production assets from climate change. This is the risk. This picture shows the risk of all of the assets that are at risk from sea level change. So this is a two-way street. Not only like is the fossil fuel industry like affected by affecting climate change, but it is actually going to be affected by climate change in a big way over the next coming decades. So what can we do about this? Like, this is where Recycle Go comes in. Like, we need to really shift from a linear to a circular, like, essentially like a business model. Like, I think the time of like traditional business models at this point are broken, right? We need to shift from like, production, consumption, and disposal to basically, really reuse, recycle, like, reduce, reuse, recycle, right? The 3 R's. So how does like, how does the blockchain come into this piece? Well, blockchain is actually one of the tools that we can use to really optimize supply chains in terms of taking raw materials and like bringing it back to the customers, turning it into product and turning it into customers, and really understanding the supply chain and optimizing. How do we do that? Well, basically, blockchain, what it does is it tracks the materials, like, it assigns a digital identity to the materials, and like, it really records it, like, and verifies the transactions through what's called a consensus algorithm, and records it like using cryptography onto a distributed ledger. By doing that, basically, we have an immutable ledger that can't be changed, that really records like, any kind of activity, especially when it comes to supply chain activity tracking, and like, and in our case, sustainable supply chain activity tracking. So what we've done in terms of recycling's blockchain is we've assigned a digital identity to the plastics. Our use case that we've been piloting, our initial use cases are going to be focused on around plastics in terms of tracking the materials. Like we assign a digital identity to the plastics themselves as they're being collected, track it as it's being like processed and turned back into recycled like plastics. By using like, basically by assigning a digital identity and blockchain activity to the plastics as they're being recycled, we really like, essentially add value to the recycled plastics themselves. And we provide data that incentivizes corporations to use recycled plastics because of the additional data that's attached to it versus virgin plastics. So we provide an incentivization mechanism for them to really start diverting away from fossil fuel-based resources. One of the activations that we're kicking off this year is we're going to be tracking ghost nets. Like, I am an environmentalist, ocean conservationist, like, aspiring surfer, actually. So, like, one of the things that we're going to be tracking is like ghost nets. A large number of the plastics pollution that is in the world's oceans are from discarded fishing nets. So one of our projects is going to be tracking ghost nets as it's being like collected and recycled back into nylon pellets. And hopefully as it's going, it's making its way into apparel. So this slide shows the digital flow and the blockchain flow as the material is going through the supply chain. And as you can see, the digital flow, a new QR code is generated for the different type of material as it's being produced from each stakeholder. And then basically, as that's happening, the blockchain flow, each layer of additional information is essentially attached to the blockchain as we're moving forward. Another activation that we're kicking off actually this week is a project in recyclers as we're tracking through our blockchain the plastic bottles as they're being collected and recycled into plastic pellets, failed plastics in our initial pilot project. So, this is basically what we're doing to make a difference. We're using data, we're doing using blockchain to track plastics, to track recycling activity, to try to make a difference in terms of like making an impact with climate change. So I ask you to join us using their voices and casting their votes and using their choices in the marketplace to fight for the future. So buy recycled products. If you see in the future, in the next few years, where recycle go like, QR codes on like the products that you're buying, please, make a choice to purchase those kind of materials. Use your voice, use your vote, use your choices, and speak the truth and power like your world depends on it. Because guess what? Your world depends on it. So thank you very much. That is my Earth Day special climate change and Recycle Go blockchain implementation. So please scan the QR code, please follow us and join us for a circular and sustainable future. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hold that screen up a little bit so people can scan, but I will pass it on to our lovely moderator, Jill from Green Education, who is going to be speaking, who is going to be introducing Rob Watson, I'm sitting on the governance committee of the SWEEP standard, which is by the father of the LEED standard. So I will pass it to you, Jill.
Great, thank you so much, Stan. That was a very useful presentation. We do have a couple of questions if you want to field those while Rob is getting set up here. The first is, can blockchain be used as an improved way to track the amount of waste that we generate?
Absolutely, yes. As long as we can just really provide a digital identity to the material and to record that information, absolutely. We have a use case that we're going to be kicking off where we're tracking recycled fibers, recycled textiles as it's being recycled and turned back into apparel. We do envision in terms of our blockchain, where we envision a future where we're going to be using it to really understand carbon impact of our activity and be able to understand our carbon offset. And in that line, especially in terms of individual consumers, we really want to understand composting and track that activity on our blockchain as well. Because look, basically food waste is a very huge contributor to GHG as well. So yeah.
Great. We do have a few more questions, but I think we'll go let Rob speak, and then we will bring you back at the end to cover the additional questions. Rob, are you ready?
Yes, give me 1 second, Jill. I was actually so engrossed in Stan's responses. Why don't you just give Stan one more question? Because I think it'll be good to get on the blockchain thing while it's still sort of fresh in people's minds.
Great. Okay, well, we can give you a couple more questions, Stan. Is the ultimate goal for every product sold to have a QR code that consumers can scan and get the entire history of, to trace it all the way back up the supply chain?
Well, yeah, I think one of the goals of this, the reason we built the blockchain is number one, provide an incentivization mechanisms for the true, egregious offenders like the petrochemical industry to participate in terms of using recycled feedstock and really making a change. But the other goal, obviously one of our other goals is to allow you to participate, allow the regular business or the individuals to actually make an impact. The blockchain allows you to directly engage. Like, imagine going to the store and scanning the QR code of the clothing, like, or the bag that you're buying, right? And be able to thank the fishermen who actually collected that net that went into the nylon that went into your bag. I mean, that kind of direct consumer engagement is only possible with blockchain, but I think it's extremely exciting. But yes, that's absolutely one of the goals.
Okay, one final question. Is RecycleGo doing any market research on whether people are actually using the QR codes?
Well, look, we are going to be, but it is such a burgeoning and new look. I mean, we're going into uncharted waters at this point. What I know is that when I started building RecycleGo and the blockchain and this app company is the world needs a solution. And that's kind of been my guiding, my North Star. And I do believe the market research will back it up, but right now we're too early in the market to actually have that data.
Great. Well, thank you. I know we're going to have more questions towards the end for you here. I'd like to welcome Rob Watson, the founder and president of Sweep. I think most people who've been attending our webinars here probably are pretty familiar with you, Rob, but we know that you have led the lead in the green building, and now you're leading us out of this wasteful mess that we're in. So I'm going to turn it over to you and talk about how blockchain and everything that Stan just shared relates to what's going on in the Sweep world.
Thanks so much, Jill. And Stan, thank you so much for an inspiring presentation on Earth Day. This climate emergency, continues to grow, and the work that we're doing and the work that you're doing in sustainable materials management, and in fact, everybody on this webinar is doing really, really important work to help solving this most pressing of problems for humanity. So in terms of how Sweep and blockchain work together, one of the key drivers of Sweep is building a market transformation framework. And a key element of that market transformation framework is building markets for recycling materials. And as Stan noted through the QR code on the consumer side, this will allow us to sort of track the provenance of materials and components of products so that consumers can make an intelligent choice. But also on the back end through activities such as the European Holy Grail process, we'll also in the MRF and stuff like that through digital watermarks and optical readers, be able to understand, what products are being either recycled or disposed of, depending upon, what kind of system you're using. So, the blockchain is going to enable us to really close the loop on the whole materials management cycle. Things like Sweep, which are focused on certifying local governments and certifying waste management companies, they shine a bright light on sort of half of the materials management circle. But once so from the moment that a consumer or a business sets a bin out on the street to be collected, all the way up to the factory gate, Sweep can cover most of that. But once it hits the factory gate, gets turned back into a new product, and then the whole use cycle, that's something that we can't penetrate, at least with a standard like Sweep. But blockchain will enable us to get some light and understanding of that back end. So it's a very important development, and we certainly applaud entrepreneurs and visionaries like Stan who can help us understand the potential for that. And so, in terms of, market transformation is regulatory push and market pull. Sweep being a voluntary standard is on the market pull aspect of this. And so what we're trying to do is incentivize and reward and identify leadership and reward that leadership. And so that's what, one of the things that blockchain can help do is identify and track the leaders and further incentivize sustainable practices across the industry. And the ability to track real-time supply chain data it makes the verification process a lot more timely and reduces lags. If anybody has played the beer game in school, where it sort of shows the impact of supply chain disruptions on beer distribution, they can understand how these lags can really make very, very difficult responses within the supply chain if you're not managing them properly. And so, based on the factors about providing transparency, providing a window into applications of recycling and tracking the materials, we estimate that blockchain applications can contribute at least to one prerequisite and up to 36 points towards certification, making it a very influential and important element to a sustainable materials management program for a municipality or a waste management company. So looking at the comprehensive sustainable materials management policy and programs, it's a prerequisite in SWEEP. And basically what we're looking to do is promote the highest and best use of materials and reduce overall generation of waste through adoption of government or corporate policies and programs. And blockchain enables procurement of goods and services that are sustainable, which is part of this comprehensive program. It helps create incentives and tracking of the data in that, which is again part of the required elements of the plan. So blockchain can enforce and reinforce many of the elements of this prerequisite in SWEEP. Looking at the comprehensive sustainable materials management lifecycle analysis and policy program. This is a performance element in the policy structure of SWEEP. Those of you who are familiar with SWEEP will remember that there are 5 performance categories in SWEEP, and sustainable materials management is one of them. The next category is waste generation and prevention, which is more of a tracking and analysis category. We sort of all know that you can't manage what you don't measure, but you can't measure what you haven't defined. And that's one of the important things about SWEEP. And we'll be able to use blockchain to define and refine many of the definitional elements within sustainable materials management. So you might have recalled that I referred to sort of the circle and how SWEEP can cover half of it. So basically, everything in the light blue and light green is what SWEEP focuses on. And blockchain will give us more transparency and windows into the darker green, the lime green, and the teal portions of the material life cycle. So the way blockchain would contribute to this area is, again, giving us that ability to look at the whole cycle and verify that the loop is actually being closed. There was a funny Dilbert cartoon once upon a time where Dilbert's working at the office and the janitor comes by and Dilbert says, "I noticed that you only have one bin while I have 2, one for my recycling, one for my garbage." And the janitor goes, "Look, a UFO." And when Dilbert looks away, he dumps both receptacles into his one trash bin. And that's, we're seeing, unfortunately, a lot of that today, some of it driven by economics and the collapse of the conventional recycling market. And so hopefully blockchain will help us identify new markets and be able to track not only the origin, but also the destination of materials as they work their way through the supply chain. Moving on to the materials processing infrastructure and market development policy. This is, again, another thing that blockchain can help support. We're definitely trying to encourage a new 21st century infrastructure in the U.S. recycling market and eventually overseas. We think that because of transportation and other supply chain issues, we should try and keep things as close to home as possible, creating jobs, creating circular economy, and those kinds of just making the loops closer, closed closer. And blockchain can help us identify and build better infrastructure for recovered material by knowing where they came from and where they're going. For the compact supply chain credit, that is another area where blockchain can very much help. We look at how materials are, once they're recovered, where do they end up? Are they being processed close? Are they being processed farther away? How are they getting there? All of this is material that can be tracked in blockchain and very simply encoded into materials as they work their way through the supply chain. Looking at the source reduction policy, this might be where something like the fishnet recovery project that Stan talked about could be applied, where we're looking at waste cleanup, waste prevention, waste reduction, and how those things, how much material came from avoided materiality in products, how much material came from recovery. The ability to quickly track that through a VR code or something like that, and just simply encoding it so that you get chain of custody will definitely help support this kind of source reduction program. Clearly, regulations have an important role. One way to look at regulations, though, is if we did it any worse, it would be illegal. And so clearly, if we want progress, it's not going to be achieved through regulation. The purpose of regulation is to get rid of the worst 20 to 30% in the market. And the purpose of markets and incentives and those kinds of methods is to raise the ceiling and improve the performance level. And these things are not mutually exclusive. These are a both and. So anybody who says only regulation is the way to go or only markets are the way to go, they're both wrong. These are both necessary but not sufficient components. And when you add them together, 1 + 1 actually equals 3 because they can leverage each other and allow things to happen more quickly and with greater performance. So anything that can encourage, markets are based on information. The ability to have information at your fingertips, whether you're a consumer or a manufacturer, is vital. So blockchain, again, it would be a core component of a way of improving the performance of market-based waste management programs. Then the waste generation and prevention, looking at reuse and rescue programs. One of the big challenges that we have in SWEEP is, how do you know it actually happened? And so, this verification element could be very easily built into SWEEP through an app and a QR code and a simple blockchain backend showing a chain of custody. So this will be one of the things that we could use to help us track certification and verify that activities actually happened. And then again, when you're purchasing environmentally preferable products and capital items for your business or your local government, the ability to just put in the QR codes for the products that you purchase will enable us eventually to very quickly and easily track how those material, what the provenance of those materials is, how energy efficient they are, et cetera, and may allow us to ultimately down the road differentiate between the levels of sustainable and environmentally preferable product procurement, and further refine and define what that means. So again, we're very encouraged about the potential for blockchain on the procurement side of things, which again leads to markets for recovered materials. And then I mentioned the compact commodity and supply chain piece, not unlike the rescue and reuse. being able to track loads of materials as they come out of the MRF or from the transfer station and on through the supply chain to their ultimate, not unlike package tracking for, the Postal Service or FedEx, et cetera. And then that way we'll be able to have verified information about where materials started, where they ended, how they got there, which would allow us to evaluate this credit much more easily. So, SWEEP is a volunteer effort, just like LEED was. We believe that we have the same potential to change the waste management industry like LEED changed the building industry. We urge you to get involved with us. Please visit our website, sweepstandard.org. Become a member of SWEEP. No one of us is as intelligent as all of us, and together we can solve complex problems much better than any of us by ourselves. We have a number of committees that are in formation as the standard is expanding, so there are lots of ability. There's lots of ability to get in early and have a big impact on this market transforming standard. And we have about a dozen companies and local governments participating in our pilot program. We're looking to have another couple dozen of pilot participants from the local government and private sector side. If you're interested in being a pilot participant, which basically allows us to hold your hand while we're going through the SWEEP certification process, please contact us through the website or just put your email in the chat, and Sam or Will will get back to you. You can connect with us on social media in addition to becoming a member and participating in the committees and helping to grow our organization. We are now an official 501c3, so your membership dues is fully tax deductible. And if you have any questions, please send it to info@sweepstandard.org. And we're really looking forward to working with you and happy to answer any questions. And I think there were a ton of questions for Stan. So I'd love to finish those up because there were some good questions, and Stan is one of the blockchain experts out there. So we should definitely take advantage of him while we have him.
Great. This question here, I think, is really for both of you. You addressed it a little bit in your discussion, Rob, about the necessity of both markets and regulations. But maybe, Stan, you can also add in your input. The question is, will businesses, municipalities, and waste haulers be fined or paid, which one, to ensure that their customers are using the QR code? How do you make them use it?
Well, my take on that answer is actually I'm going to preface it by really extending a support for what's called extended producer responsibility programs, EPR programs. And this is the general concept where basically a producer of a product or the packaging is responsible for the cost of the cleanup of it after it's consumed. And this is in terms of costing, these kind of things, we really have to understand, especially and it needs to be legislated really on a municipal or a federal level, basically who's going to be responsible for the cost, because there is an environmental cost and it's not being factored into the price of the product itself. So blockchain is definitely a way to really first and foremost, it's a way to track materials and track basically activity of the product / packaging. But it's also a way, if you apply, integrate tokenomics into it, it's also a way to basically apply EPR programs in terms of essentially using let's call it a token as a way to fund cleanup activity. And when the product actually gets scanned back into back into the recycling supply chain, then those tokens or those credits are released. So like, it's a way for basically deposit, like, bottle deposit return programs, like, as a very easy implementation of like EPR programs, can be blockchain based, and it will actually generate data to show where recycling is not happening and where recycling education needs to be reinforced.
Yeah. So, again, the market transformation is a combination of carrots and sticks. Typically, the sticks will start small and the carrots will start small, particularly when you have a nascent technology. And then, both of them, as it gets more widespread, they will sort of leverage off of each other. And, last year's carrot will become this year's stick, and, then a new carrot will be put out. And so, we want to give both positive and negative reinforcement so that we move people towards the sustainable position. Everybody thinks that, governments and economics are hard masters, but believe me, they are little fluffy bunny marshmallows compared to chemistry, biology, and physics. So, we'll either learn the hard lessons or the easy ones. So the short answer is, wait and see how we figure out how best to integrate this technology. The goal will be to make improvements and help people make money. That's that's got to be part of it, right?
Great. Rob, will blockchain be explicitly stated in SWEEP?
Eventually. I do believe so. Again, once we understand a little bit more about, what its capabilities are, et cetera, it's a little premature right now to do it. It's probably something that, would end up being, if we were to explicitly mention it, it would probably end up in an innovation credit, right? We don't want to hang credits out there that are sort of part of the denominator and use up, if you will, the coins of the realm of SWEEP for things that aren't, real or scaled. That's just frustrating. But we definitely want to mention it and incentivize it. So, if we think of something, if somebody has a credit that they think might be kind of interesting to put into SWEEP, give us an idea and we'll put it into the innovation or exploration categories. And then that way people can try it out without being penalized with regard to the final certification, level.
Question from Chris Thompson. Could you expand and easily apply the solid waste focus of SWEEP to liquid, as in wastewater and reclamation?
That's a great question. And, we punted a little bit on the biosolid piece of it, mainly because we sort of got to the end of the standard development process and realized, we had put the word biosolid in, but hadn't really thought it through. As we go through the pilot process, we will be looking a lot more about the biosolid management element. And, if we do find that there is a strong linkage or possibly potential for a wastewater management standard similar to SWEEP, maybe we'll call it WEEP. I don't know, water environment, but there certainly is a possibility of doing that. And again, stay tuned for wastewater biosolids as part of that solid waste management handling and coverage. We just hadn't done our homework enough on it yet to include it in the system now, but that's something that we should see in a year or so.
Great. Chris is suggesting swirl as your new
Okay.
Stan, when did the idea of blockchain become an idea for improving transparency and traceability of the supply chain?
Well, blockchain is blockchain is really started because of Bitcoin in terms of Satoshi Nakamoto's seminal white paper in terms of like the Bitcoin blockchain. And it really, I think it really started really right after that, because in terms of taking a transaction, recording the transaction, and basically using cryptography to verify the transaction and then basically put it onto a permanent ledger. I think very soon after that was built out and put out into the market, people started saying wait a minute, there is a system to understand what a product is going through, all of that, all that's happening, like, GPS time date stamp of the material as it's being handled by each stakeholder in the supply chain. Like, wait a minute, this is great. This is a great tool to understand what's going on with the product as it's traveling through. One of the first use cases of the blockchain was actually with Bumblebee, in terms of, like, putting the activity from the fishermen sustainably fished, like, sustainably sourced tuna all the way into the can. So it's like, wow, you get that level of granularity and information from a blockchain, like with that distributed ledger, with that way to verify that activity and to track it.
In the green building world, we were looking at chain of custody issues around sustainable wood products, right? So anybody that's done any kind of work in chain of custody types of things, and once they have a basic understanding of what blockchain can do, it's immediately obvious that this is a really, really good application for that whole chain of custody thing. And the other thing that I just wanted to jump in and point out that a lot of people conflate Bitcoin with blockchain and basically say, oh my God, the whole planet is going to be one giant server and it's too expensive for energy and stuff like that. And blockchain, even though Bitcoin is built on a blockchain platform, the kinds of energy consumption and requirements that we're seeing for Bitcoin will not be present in the kind of blockchain applications that Stan's talking about. They're just for a whole host of technical reasons, which would occupy an entire seminar by themselves, just requires a whole different level of computing to get to the point of the level of security that's needed for the kind of transaction tracing that is. So we're not killing the planet to save it with blockchain in this regard.
Great. Well, I know we're just up about with the hour. I'd like to see if there's any last minute questions, Will, that you've noticed in the chat that should be addressed. And while we wait for that, I have one final question for Rob and Stan. First of all, thank you for sharing. A big question: how the Focal company can earn profit through blockchain-based business model, and who pays for the blockchain implementation costs?
I can say that basically right now with our pilot project deployments, we're really starting to build the economic models around this. And this is a burgeoning industry. And what we're doing is basically we're creating a, I like to say when I talk about what we've built over at RecycleGo in terms of the recycling blockchain, is we're really building a new business model. We're building a new society where we're essentially measuring social impact. We're measuring recycling activity. So we're by tracking that, we can now assign a value to that. And there's a value to recycling. There's a societal value to recycling. There's an environmental value to recycling. So based on the fact that we are creating value, there is definitely a business model around it. And we're basically in the beginning innings of the future that we're building.
Transparency is the watchword for the 21st century, and consumers are demanding it. You just won't be able to do business, frankly, and that's going to be incentive enough to do it.
Yeah, look, in terms of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, ESG metrics at this point are basically they're a prerequisite for a lot of firms in terms of where they're putting their investment dollars at this point. So it's they're in terms of blockchain. I think that is really, in the grand scheme of things, in terms of different economic and future economic models, I have no doubt that there will be a solution, that there is a solution.
I think that's a great place to end.
Great. Thank you again, Rob, Stan. The recording of this webinar will be available within the next week, I think both through the SWEEP and the Green Education websites. And I'd like to thank Stan, thank Rob, thank Will and John and Sam behind the scenes for answering questions. and like to take some time today to go out
All right,
and
guys.
enjoy the natural environment that we're all working so hard to protect.
All right, before she calls back again, let's get off.